So we have some important news in the battle to end the NFA's restrictions on suppressors. This all comes after the Trump DOJ changed their position and admitted that suppressors are protected arms under the Second Amendment, but they argued that they still could be restricted, and this NFA scheme operates as a shall issue permit. And ultimately, the Fifth Circuit agreed to cover for them. They agreed to rule in the Trump DOJ's favor, and now they also did something in this case which has some big implications for this challenge going forward. So let's talk about what is happening. Now, before we jump into this video, if you guys want to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to subscribe. You can also double check to make sure YouTube is not unsubscribed you. And then also, I want to thank the main supporter of this channel, which is First Form. You guys know that First Form is an amazing company. They're pro-freedom, pro-America. They support the Second Amendment and what we talk about here on the channel. Plus, they have great supplements. So if you have maybe a New Year's resolution coming up and you're trying to get healthier, check them out, check their supplements out. And right now, if you order supplements, you can get a free 5-pack of protein sticks. So as I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we're going to be discussing a suppressor challenge that was recently ruled on by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. The stakes in this case just also got even higher because of what the Fifth Circuit just ordered. Now, this comes in a case called U.S. versus Peterson, and it deals with the constitutionality of the NFA as it applies to suppressors. Now, in this case, Mr. Peterson challenged his conviction of violating the NFA based on a theory that the NFA and its suppressor restrictions do in fact violate the Second Amendment. Now, on first review of this case, the Fifth Circuit 3-judge panel found that suppressors are not arms and they do not trigger 2A protections. However, that shifted after the Trump DOJ got control of the case and they conceded for the purposes of this challenge that suppressors are in fact protected arms. However, the Fifth Circuit recently issued a new decision in this case, and the 3-judge panel ruled that even though suppressors may be protected arms, the NFA's restrictions do not violate the Second Amendment. They actually argued and found that under Bruin, the NFA operates as a shall issue permit scheme and therefore is permissible. That, of course, is shocking and very concerning and has broad-reaching implications. Now, in response to that new ruling, Mr. Peterson was seeking Fifth Circuit en banc panel review of his case. The Trump DOJ submitted their response to that petition, arguing that en banc panel review was not needed and that it should be rejected. And ultimately, the Trump DOJ was pushing for this case to just be simply dismissed. Now, ultimately, the Fifth Circuit en banc panel decided to not only deny the en banc panel review in this case, but they also issued a mandate in this challenge, allowing that lower court decision to go into effect. Mr. Peterson and his counsel, in response to that, filed an unopposed motion to stay that mandate because they will now be seeking Supreme Court review. However, this is where things got really shaky in this case. The Fifth Circuit just denied that stay, so they said, no, we are not going to stay the mandate, even though you're going to go to the Supreme Court. Now, this is not simply just a denial by the Fifth Circuit. At stake with this stay was also whether Mr. Peterson will now potentially have to report to go back to prison, even while he has an active cert petition going to the Supreme Court and being reviewed by the Supreme Court. Now, that was brought up as one of the reasons why the Fifth Circuit should stay that mandate, but apparently the Fifth Circuit did not care, and they did not care that Supreme Court review was being sought or that Mr. Peterson will now potentially have to report back to prison while he has an active request in the Supreme Court. So things in this case got really shaky. However, this is not yet done for Mr. Peterson. So for those not aware, this case deals with an issue that started back in 2022 where both federal and state law enforcement officers executed warrants at Mr. Peterson's home in Louisiana, also where he had a home-based FFL. There was a federal task force, including ATF agents and 50 law enforcement officers who executed that warrant. Now, they searched his home-based FFL, also his home, and there was some claims about some issues with some improper record keeping, some issues with 4473s, failure to complete some paperwork and forward it to the ATF, and then also some claims that some of the products bought at that home-based FFL that were later also found at crime scenes. But really, out of this entire incident, it is the possession of a single solvent trap that was in Mr. Peterson's bedroom, in his bedroom safe, that was not registered as a suppressor under the NFA that really got him into trouble. Now, in response to that, Mr. Peterson brought a motion to dismiss the charge based on the Second Amendment, but the lower court denied that actual motion, and so they said no, the conviction and the charge can move forward. Now, he ultimately, like I mentioned, appealed to the Fifth Circuit for a reversal, but on original review, the Fifth Circuit sided with the then Biden ATF and Biden DOJ. The Fifth Circuit found that a suppressor is not a necessary accoutrement of a firearm that is required to make the firearm useful or functional. Mr. Peterson and his counsel at that time decided to seek rehearing en banc in the Fifth Circuit, but like I mentioned, that petition was later pulled because the Trump DOJ got control of the case, shifted position on suppressors, admitting that they are protected arms, and that kind of changed some of the analysis. So the 3-judge panel in the Fifth Circuit had to go back, re-review the case, and issue a new ruling. Well, even after all of that, the 3-judge panel still upheld the NFA's restrictions in their recent ruling. The Fifth Circuit still ruled that the NFA can regulate suppressors, since in their eyes, the process operates as a shall issue permit, which they believe is permissible under Bruen. Now, under Bruin's dicta, there were statements from Justice Kavanaugh in one of his concurrences where he said CCW schemes may be generally permissible if they apply objective criteria, things like background checks, fingerprinting, and fees. But here the Fifth Circuit twisted Bruen and the CCW permits decision in ruling, and ultimately they twisted that dicta to justify the NFA's registration and taxation scheme. They said that it operates as a shall issue permit. However, that ruling is now heading up for Supreme Court review. Originally, like I mentioned, Mr. Peterson and his counsel were seeking en banc panel review in the Fifth Circuit, but that was quickly denied. Then the Fifth Circuit decided to issue the mandate in the case, allowing the lower court ruling to go into effect against Mr. Peterson. Now, in response to that, Mr. Peterson and his counsel asked the Fifth Circuit to stay that mandate because they told the Fifth Circuit directly that they will now be seeking Supreme Court review. But unfortunately, the Fifth Circuit decided to deny that emergency stay, even though it was unopposed, and even though the Trump DOJ agreed that they were fine with, the granting of the stay as this goes to the Supreme Court. But again, I guess the Fifth Circuit just simply did not care. They issued an order which simply stated that it is so ordered, the appellant's unopposed motion to stay the issuance of the mandate pending the filing and disposition of the petition for writ of cert is denied. Now, the concern about not issuing the stay and the harm that would come to Mr. Peterson was raised to the Fifth Circuit in that motion. And in the motion, they stated that good cause also exists to stay issuance of the mandate because Peterson will suffer irreparable harm if required to report to prison during the pendency of his petition. The district court has ordered that he shall remain out on bond pending his appeal and will set a self-surrender date after his appeal has been ruled on. Granting Peterson's stay would ensure that his appeal remains pending while the Supreme Court considers his case. If he were imprisoned before the Supreme Court rules on his petition, Peterson could be deprived of his liberty for a conviction and sentence that the Supreme Court would ultimately vacate in their entirety if they were to rule in his favor. But again, I guess the Fifth Circuit simply did not care. Now, even with that, this case is not yet done. Mr. Peterson is taking his case, like I mentioned, to the Supreme Court, and there is the option to petition the Supreme Court to grant an emergency stay on the mandate during the process and during this review. Even if they don't take cert in this case, even if they don't grant review of this case, he can seek an emergency stay of that mandate while they're considering if they're going to take his case. Now, one of the interesting things with this is this also could potentially add some additional evidence of the lower court's mishandling of his case. It could further show the Supreme Court how high stakes this case is and why they must grant review to this challenge. So unfortunately, that is what currently is going on in this critical suppressor challenge. We will now see how this plays out, how this plays out at the Supreme Court level, and also if they seek that emergency stay and if the Supreme Court grants it and allows Mr. Peterson to stay out on bond while they are considering his case, because the Fifth Circuit did not want to do that. They issued the mandate, they denied all of that. So that's what's really at stake in this case, not just for the individual, but also the broader reaching implications for the 2A cause about whether the NFA's restrictions on suppressors do in fact violate the Second Amendment. So again, unfortunately, that's what's currently going on in this critical suppressor challenge. As we get more information, as it develops more, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is simply to like, comment, and subscribe. All of those things help to fuel the algorithm. Also, you can check out one of the 2 videos here on the screen that the YouTube algorithm thinks that you'll find helpful. But as always, thank you so much for all of your support. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.